having said that, we're going to get right into the show. We always start with the lowdown where we talk all things Apple. Um, Obviously, everybody is talking about, or over the past couple of weeks or months, have been talking about all of the tech companies that have been seemingly doing layoffs. Talk about Microsoft, talk about Google, talk about Amazon, talk about Meta, talk about some of these other ones. List goes on and on and on. One of the names you won't see on there, knock on wood, is Apple. Apple has been able to avoid laying off in mass. I'm pretty sure they've had some restructuring, reorganization. I'm pretty sure all companies do some sort of reorgan to where they try to consolidate or whatever the case may be, but they haven't done these massive tens and thousands of people at one time. And people have been trying to figure out, well, what is that? Why isn't Apple doing these layoffs? Because it sounds kind of sucky, but they would be well within their right to lay
gloat a little.
off, because everybody, well, not necessarily gloat, if they did decide to lay off, people wouldn't be that upset because everybody else is doing it, right? I kind of mentioned, earlier, it's a previous podcast to where, you definitely want to do it when everybody else is doing it versus you be the first or you the last to do it, because all eyes are going to be on you, versus if you do it around the same time everybody else is doing
Right in
it.
the middle, yeah.
Yeah, you kind of don't take the targeted heat, versus the whole sector taking it, right? So,
Right.
For now, Apple has not laid anybody off, and I don't see any rumors that they are plan on doing it anytime soon. And it seems as it was a result of, according to the story that I'm reading in Barron's, that Apple has relatively had conservative hiring means in general. So it doesn't have to slash as many jobs now because, they didn't go crazy and hire a bunch of people, anytime they get a little uptick in, revenue or stock price or whatever the case may be. There's this quote that I want to read. It says, Apple never hired aggressively through the pandemic and doesn't need to go through extensive headcount reductions, unlike peers. We continue to think consumer staples and or high-end luxury companies remain the relevant peer group for Apple. So basically what they're saying is, we didn't hire like willy-nilly, and our products people are still willing to pay for, even if, things are kind of tight. They're still going to buy their iPhones, still going to buy their iPads, things of that nature. So I thought that was dope that Apple, is making those smart decisions, so they can kind of weather the storm as far as layoffs. Now, again, who knows? Maybe a couple weeks, couple months from now, Apple will finally, or reluctantly drop the hammer on do some sort of layoffs. But I can't remember when the last time Apple did a major layoff. So I just wanted to get your opinion
Yeah.
on why you think, in addition to, are there some other reasons you think Apple, is it because the phones are still selling good? Is it because they, have all these stores? What do you think it attributes to, in addition to them just being kind of cheap when it comes to hiring people in the first place?
I think, the article, and you hit the, hammer on the nail. They were very conservative when it came to hiring additional talent. One thing we do know is that Apple is not short on people who want to work for them. So they
Mm-hmm.
could have hired a bunch of people, but I don't know who in the leadership, kind of spearheaded this, but I think what a lot of other companies did, like your Facebooks, like your Googles, they had an uptick, during the pandemic. Even though we were in the pandemic and things are down, the tech industry was like booming,
Mm-hmm.
and people were taking advantage. And I think they may have lost sight of that. Similar to like if you are, one of the Instagram influencers or sellers, say you came up with, like I think a prime example, the young lady who opened a do-rag store,
Mm-hmm.
during the pandemic, there was a point in time when everybody everybody meaning non-black people, were like on this, oh my god, a do-rag, what is this, what is this magical article of clothing, so much so that she opened a brick and mortar store. And I mean, when she first opened it, it was like the first of its kind. It, became popular on the internet, and people were coming and people were buying. I think just recently, either this week or last week, she had to close the brick and mortar because
Mm,
it was one of those things that were, a fad. And I think some of these tech companies, they
mm-hmm,
mistook a quote unquote fad and made it into a business decision, and
mm-hmm.
now
A
it's
new
coming
vertical.
back to, right, and now it's
Mm-hmm,
coming back to bite them,
mm-hmm,
because rising in inflation, we saw what happened with SVB, we've seen
mm-hmm.
what's happening with other, investors and founders and banks, and people are really getting scared and skittish. So they're starting to trim the fat, so to speak, in preparation for a recession and preparation for a huge downturn, whether that comes, in like a flood like 2008, or whether it's something kind of light. They're just being overly cautious and really cutting things down. And the fact this comes on the heels of Facebook announcing, I think today, that they are laying off an additional 10,000 to
Oh
the
wow.
original 11,000 that they originally planned. And I think in this article in Barron's, it says that, yeah, Meta latest job cut announcement of 10,000 roles on top of the 11,000 cuts previously announced. So
Mm-hmm,
this just happened, I think, either today or yesterday, that this announcement just came out. So I think they did the first 11,000 for the overflow of people that they hired that they didn't need to. And now I
mm-hmm.
think maybe this 10,000 is to kind of trim the fat in preparation for a potential recession or potential increase in inflation.
Yep. They announced what's today, the 14th. Yeah, so it looks like it was
15.
yesterday. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Right, right. So yeah, so it's funny how, and as a side note, it's funny how major businesses can decide that they need to lay off people to be more efficient, to trim the fat, to get to a certain number, whatever the case may be. And people are like, oh, that's what businesses do. That's a smart business decision. You hate to see it, but the businesses are, the name of the business is to turn a profit. And if they can't turn a profit, first thing they're going to do is cut expenses, and the biggest expense is employees. So such is life,
Yeah.
right? But when people do it,
Mm,
recession.
mm.
When people say, you know what, I need to trim the fat, I need to stop going out to eat, I need to stop taking vacations, I need to
I'm
stop
pay
buying
down some of this
homes,
debt.
I'm
Yeah.
gonna pay down some of this debt, I'm gonna stop buying cars, I'm gonna stop buying homes, I'm going
Yeah.
to put my money in the bank. Now all of a sudden the country is like, oh, we need to do something. What are we gonna do? Drop prices because we need to get these suckers out here spending money. But when
Yeah.
businesses with all these billions of dollars
Mm.
decide they ain't gonna make as much money that they projected to make,
Even though
so
they still
as a
make plenty of
result,
money.
still made plenty of money.
Yeah.
We just didn't make how much we said we was gonna make. And
Mm.
since we didn't hit that mark, now we got to lay people off. It's like, oh
Yeah.
well,
Shut it down.
it is what it is. That's how
Mm.
businesses stay afloat. But when people do it, it's like, oh no, we need y'all out there spending money, or this economy is going to tank. And it's just, it always amazes me how our economy is built on the backs of people
Mm.
who can't afford it versus the
Mm-hmm.
people who can afford it. They are the ones that always getting the breaks, the ones that are always not held liable for things. It's just crazy.
They
But
got to be
anyway, side
bailed
note.
out. You got to be bailed out because
Right,
it could hurt everybody.
right.
But when they are trying to give, working class people a $10,000 break on student loans, oh, we can't afford that.
We
Now it
can't
has to go
afford
to
that.
Supreme Court to make
Right.
that decision. It's very interesting. And, on our tangent, it's going to be very interesting to see how they spin this, because you just bailed out this company who's,
This bank,
three,
yeah. That's
this
two
bank.
banks. It's two banks. I think they
Yeah,
built out another one.
Signature. Yeah,
Uh huh.
Signature was after SVB. But the thing is, prior to this happening, the several of the C-suite members, they cashed out a bunch of stock
Did they?
right
I didn't
before
read
they
that.
cashed. One of them, it was like $4.4 million between the three of them. And so this was like right before it collapsed. And so people are saying, "Oh no, it was a scheduled thing." So what?
Sure.
Cancel, cancel
Even if it
payment.
was right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cancel. And then they were like, I think they were scheduled to get bonuses right before I think the federal government took over. Those bonuses went out as well. I saw that on
What
the
you get a
news.
bonus for if the company, if the bank is in peril and y'all got to raise funds in the first place, and when you don't raise, when people panic because you mentioned you got to raise funds in order to cover the people's money that you said was in the bank in the first place, how you get a bonus off of that?
Yeah, they did. And then they were like, well, actually most of the people who got the bonuses, they went to, other SVB accounts. So, they're kind of tied up in it. No, they're not, because the government has guaranteed all the depositors. And
All of
some
them.
of the depositors are these executives for the bank. So they're still going to get their money, even
That
though
is,
they set this up to put the run on the bank to cause this collapse.
or
And
didn't see it coming, whether they set it up on purpose or were negligent in a job. Again, how you get a bonus when you didn't see this coming?
yeah. And so what they're saying is, Peter Thiel, I think they're trying to put the blame on him. He has quite a few investors, founders
And
that
he
use
told
that
them to
bank,
yank their money.
and he
Yeah.
told them to take their money out. And
Mm-hmm.
so they started pulling their money out, and they couldn't cover deposits. So now they're trying to sell bonds
Mm-hmm.
to make up the difference, because when you think you go to your bank, it's your money that's in
Right.
there, and you
Right.
go to make a deposit of your own money, which you're entitled to do, and they tell you we ain't got it. Like, what the hell? How are you gonna tell me you
Right.
don't have
My
my
money.
money? And so it's one
Mm-hmm.
of those things where it's very interesting. And I get, people are talking on there talking about, well, I'm a founder, I'm not rich, this is going to impact us. I get it.
Mm-hmm.
I completely understand. At the same time, when you go into these type of investments, you understand that there is risk. This
Right.
is one of those risks. And the
Right.
fact that the government is going to bail it out, and they're saying it's not a bailout, it's not coming from taxpayer money. Eventually this gets back to the taxpayer having to front this, even if it isn't direct upfront. Trust me, the taxpayer is going to pay for
And
this.
even if the taxpayers don't pay anything for it, it's still a bailout. You risked your money.
Mm-hmm.
The play didn't work.
Mm-hmm.
You're supposed to. It's a risk.
You take the
If
loss.
you take the loss, and then of course, I get it. I know how economics work,
Yep,
and
absolutely.
all these other,
It's
especially
not black
SV.
and white. There are special use cases, absolutely all of that. But in the
And
grand scheme of things,
yep, yep. But if the American people mess up, it's just like,
I mean,
sucks to be you.
ask for $10,000
On
for
student
student loan
loan,
debt.
and y'all tripping.
It was a whole bunch of this you on this day, because a lot of these people who were against the student loan forgiveness, a lot of them talk trash about it, but they were the same ones. We got it. The government has to step in. They have to guarantee this. I mean, and then people like this, you bringing up those tweets and they're talking about
Hmm.
this is not the right of the government. You
Right.
borrowed it. You should pay it back. It's your. It was a bunch of issues, and it was like, mm-hmm.
See,
So I'm very
see.
interested to see
Hmm.
how this is going to play out with the political figures who've taken all this money from these tech investors as campaign contributions.
Hmm. Hmm.
How are you going to justify this to the
Hmm.
American people when you just told them that you can't give them $10,000 because it's against their constitutional rights? At the
Hmm.
same time, you swing over here
Uh-huh.
and you just
Uh-huh.
got bailed out by multiple hundreds of billions. Like, something in the milk ain't clean.
That's how society works. Unfortunately,
Mm-hmm.
those who have will always have, and those who
Always.
don't always end up getting the short end of the stick. But all right, moving on, moving
Yeah, yeah,
on.
we talked about that. Yeah.
It seems like Apple is dropping a new app. It's called Apple Music Classical, and it is exactly what it sounds like it is. Apple has retained its classical music library. Apple, I think they bought a startup. Where is it at? They bought a startup and they really haven't done anything with it. But basically, what the startup was classical music, and Apple hasn't done anything with the catalog with the property that they purchased until now. It looks like you can pre-order Apple Music Classical from the App Store, and it'll be installed on your device as soon as the app is released. Same, if you're already paying for Apple Music, it runs off the same $9.99 per month subscription, so you're not paying extra for it if you're already paying for Apple Music. You'll get access to links to Apple Music segments of your subscription. So if you're in Apple Music and you find some classical music, I think it'll link out to this Apple Music Classical, if I'm reading that correctly. It will only be coming to iPhones though, and it'll only be compatible with iOS 15.4 or later. So pretty much all the latest phones, like even I think the iPhone 7 will get Apple Music Classical. Doesn't say anything for iPads or Mac OS, just for iPhones. So yeah, if you're into that, you can definitely go and do some searching. Wait for this to drop on the 28th. Yeah, March 28th, and you'll be able to dig through and create a library of classical music. Again, that ain't my thing, but I make sure that there are some people out there who are listening to classical music, so you can get that as easy as you would get anything from Apple Music.
Yeah, I was a little confused. I was initially a little confused about this. I'm like, why don't they just roll it into Apple Music because it
Right.
still is music? And then when I read down a little bit more in the article, it talked about it. And it says one of the biggest reasons why Apple is separating Apple Music classical from the primary Apple Music library is curation. So apparently, it makes sense. You have class, you say you have Beethoven's concerto, whatever the flavor.
Mm-hmm.
He played it and he composed it, but there are so many other people who have played it themselves on their
Mm-hmm.
piano or their
Mm-hmm.
violin. So it's all these different types of variations of the one song. Whereas for most, mainstream music, you
If you
know,
search for it in Apple Music, you'll find 50 million thousand versions of it versus Apple Music Classical. You search for name, you're going to get that song.
no, reverse. So
Oh,
with
reverse? Okay.
Apple Classical, you'll see everybody who's redone
Oh,
or
okay. Okay.
who's re-recorded the original artist. So like I said,
Okay.
Beethoven. So if you have someone who's played it on a violin or someone else who's played it on the piano, you'll have all of those versions. Whereas with Apple Music, say if you got a Beyonce song, you're not going to see covers of Beyonce's song in Apple Music. You're just
Oh,
going to
okay.
see Beyonce's
So there are
version
people with
because that's the real version.
Apple Music Classical. People want to hear those cover versions more
Right.
so.
Or at least, they'll all be in there. So where it
Uh,
won't really, I guess, mess with your algorithm or your curation with your
mm-hmm.
regular Apple Music because it would just be, for lack of a better word, it'd be too much. When if you want to listen to Bach's Concerto number 5 from, you know, Sally McFlipperson, you can
Mm-hmm.
go and find her version, but you will also see the original as well. So apparently that's because I was like, why would they separate it? But yep, that's what they said.
All
Yeah.
right. All right. So, like I said, if you're into that, definitely check that out. Let us know what you think. Hit us up on social. How does it work? All right. The last one I got for the lowdown is it looks like people within Apple are pushing that the AR headset, the rumored AR headset, will launch in 2023, as opposed to some people inside of Apple are thinking that a 2024 or 2025 release would be better so they can catch up and make a better version of it. According to this story I'm reading, Cultamac, Apple's operations team wanted to launch a version of the headset with ski goggle like design. So you're thinking the big ski goggles, right?
Mm.
It would have allowed users to watch 3D videos, chat with realistic avatars on FaceTime calls, and do interactive workouts. But the design team pushed back on the release. The designers wanted to launch a lightweight version of the AR glasses. However, this will take a long time as technology is still not ready. I think we read a story or talked about a story to where, you wear the goggles, and then you have
Hmm.
to attach to a battery
Battery
pack
pack. Yeah.
that you wear, which weird. So maybe that's the designers saying that we don't want to release it like that. So give us some time.
Hmm.
But Johnny Ive, no longer in charge of Apple design operations, the design team does not enjoy the same powers as before. So it sounds like
Mm.
the operations team, which Tim Cook used to be a part of,
Hmm.
they seem like they have a little bit more weight versus the Johnny Ive team that love the design, so on and so forth. They're kind of taking a back seat. And reading a little bit more, financial report reveals that Tim Cook even sided with the operations team and pressed ahead with the headset's launch, which will reportedly happen this year. This was despite objections from the design team. Seemingly, designers and engineers inside the company are under huge pressure to ship the headset. So it looks like, according to the story, there's some disagreements, but the engineers and operations teams have won, and it looks like, if the rumors are true, we may see an AR VR headset later this year. What do you think about that?
This isn't surprising because the designers are very much purists
Mm-hmm.
and they want it to be perfect in every way. Operation engineering, they're like, hey, we got a version. It's been a few years now. People have been talking about it. People are going to lose patience. They're going to lose interest because it has been kind of languishing out there. So you want to make a perfect product that nobody might buy because they lose interest, or we may make a subpar or less than perfect design according to you and strike while the iron is hot and getting money. I think they can win honestly both ways because as we've seen from the original iPhone to now what we're on the iPhone
The
14,
iterations, right?
the iterations, if you go with the ski goggle version, basically use whatever naming convention you're going to use, how you have the iPhone 4, 4S, now we're up to the Pro and the Pro Max and the XR. It's really about if you have a good enough project and product with the ski goggles to launch, you think you have a good enough product, launch that version with whatever name you want. And once you get to 24, 2024, 24, what, 2025, if you have your perfect product, launch that under the same heading or under the same banner, but just a different version. I
Mm-hmm.
don't get why it's that big of a, I
Well,
guess,
what
issue if you think of it that way. To
what's
me,
going to happen is people want Apple to be perfect, period.
yeah.
And what I envision happening is if Apple does release a product that doesn't meet the immediate next best thing, greatest thing since sliced bread that Apple unfortunately has built itself up to be, they're going to see the ski goggles, and let's just say argument's sake, you got to hook up to a battery pack and you got to spin around 3 times and click your heels, you know, before it powers up. People are going to clown this thing
Yeah.
to death. Now, that may not stop them from buying it, but it not shame is not the right word, but Apple, they may get scarred, tarred and feathered a little bit if this doesn't come out to be, oh, this is the best. This Apple does it again with the best AR goggles on earth. Back when the iPhone came out, that was something new.
Mm.
People didn't know what to think. Apple had to kind of guide people as to what this thing is, and then we came along for the ride, right? That's not the case with AR VR goggles. We know what those are supposed to do. They're supposed to create a virtual reality. Now, how well they do it is based on how well the company is, and people assume Apple being up here, they're going to do something great. Now, if they don't, and they come out with something that's just here, and Apple says, well, this thing costs $3,000, but hang on, we're going to iterate. People may be like, man, from Apple, from anybody else,
Yeah.
yeah, but from Apple, shame on y'all. So I'm not saying that's what I think is going to happen, but I can
Mm.
see, damned if you do, damned if
Yeah.
you don't for Apple.
Yeah, Apple's gonna get clowned either way, whatever the case may be. Even if it's the most perfect thing to come out,
True.
it's still
They're gonna
going to
pick it
be
apart.
the
True.
dissenters that find, oh, the back flap isn't flush with the
Right.
front flap,
Right.
something to that effect. But to me, if the operations and engineering team thinks that they have a good enough product
Mm-hmm.
to put that Apple name on and to push it out into the population, that it has to be, still pretty good. I
Mm-hmm.
think from what it seems to me from this article, I could be reading it wrong, is the designers have one particular design in mind. That's their AR glasses. They don't want to do nothing outside of that. Whatever else you got going on, we don't want that. This is what we
Mm-hmm.
design. This is what we want. And if we don't have this, then we don't want none of it. It
mm-hmm.
could be that where they want to do their explicit version of this, whereas the operations team is like, well, this was our kind of one of our initial thoughts, and we've made this
Mm-hmm.
work, and it works pretty good. We like it, and you know, we can justify the $3,000 cost, because regardless, these things could walk and talk and walk and charge themselves, walk over
Mm-hmm.
to plug themselves to the charger for $3,000. People are still going to complain because it is $3,000.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't, again, the way how they get through this, they have to set it up in the way that it makes sense. They have to do, they're going to have to do some, greasing of the wheels. They're going to have to do some flashy videos, and they're going to have to make it one of the biggest Apple events outside of the original iPhone event to get people ready and to make people aware of what this particular goggle version is, so people can start to buy into it, especially with a $3,000 price tag.
Yeah, so we shall see. And I think the story, they make a good point to where, Apple has been all about design up until now. Now, those design folks that have been the kings and
Johnny's
queens of
gone,
Apple,
so
yeah, now they don't have their, ace in the hole.
they're
So
champion. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So now they may have to take a back seat and let the engineers and operators and the operations folks, take the front and let them decide the future of Apple, as it were.